You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. The email arrived in my inbox at 11:47 PM on a Thursday, marked urgent with a subject line that made me pause. Specialised childcare position, immediate placement required, confidential. I'd been working late again trying to finish reports for the state foster care system, where I'd spent the last 8 years watching children fall through cracks I couldn't fill. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, and my small apartment felt more like a prison than a home. The sender was listed as P. Hawthorne, Director of Operations, Crimson Valley Institute. I'd never heard of the organisation, but the email was professionally formatted and included detailed salary information that made me sit up straight in my desk chair. "Mr. Sterling," it began, "your background in developmental psychology and specialised experience with traumatized children makes you an ideal candidate for our specialised childcare coordinator position. We are a private residential facility in northern Montana that provides care for children with extraordinary hereditary conditions, requiring constant supervision and specialised protocols." The salary figure was staggering, $150,000 annually, plus housing, full medical coverage, and what they termed hazard compensation. More money than I had ever imagined making in childcare. But it was the final paragraph that truly caught my attention. The children in our care have inherited certain abilities from their biological parents that manifest in ways requiring unique management approaches. This position demands absolute discretion, unwavering protocol adherence, and genuine compassion for children who face circumstances beyond their control or choosing. Something about the careful phrasing intrigued me. In 8 years of foster care work, I'd seen children damaged by every conceivable trauma, but this sounded different, more specific, more unusual. I replied immediately and my phone rang within minutes. "Mr. Sterling, this is Patricia Hawthorne. Thank you for your quick response. I need to be direct with you. This position is unlike anything in conventional childcare. Are you prepared to hear details that may challenge your understanding of what's possible?" Her voice carried an authority that demanded attention, but also a weariness that spoke of having seen too much. "I'm listening. The children we care for are the biological offspring of humans who entered into supernatural contracts with entities from parallel dimensions, what historical texts have called demons. These children have inherited abilities that defy conventional understanding: manipulation of organic matter, limited precognition, electromagnetic influence, dimensional phasing, animal telepathy, and other manifestations we're still cataloguing." I set down my pen. "You're talking about supernatural abilities?" "I'm talking about children, Mr. Sterling. Children who didn't choose their inheritance, who want to play video games and worry about homework and dream of normal futures, despite being capable of things that would terrify most adults. They need advocates, not researchers. They need care, not containment." Something in her tone convinced me she was serious. Completely, utterly serious. "Why me specifically?" "Your psychological assessments show exceptional empathy, combined with analytical thinking. Your case reports demonstrate genuine care for children others have written off as hopeless. But most importantly, you've never worked with a child you didn't see as worth saving." She was right. Even the most difficult cases, the kids everyone else had given up on, I had always believed deserved another chance. "When would you need an answer?" "Now, Mr. Sterling, we can have a moving truck at your apartment tomorrow if you accept. These children can't wait for bureaucratic processes or extended deliberation." I looked around my cramped apartment, at the stack of hopeless case files, at the life I had built around other people's broken children. Maybe it was time to try helping kids who needed a different kind of salvation. I accept. The drive to northern Montana took me through landscapes that grew progressively more isolated and wild. After 6 hours on increasingly narrow roads, I followed handwritten directions that led through forests so dense they blocked out most of the afternoon sun. The final approach was a gravel road marked by signs warning against trespassing, hunting, or camping. The Crimson Valley Institute emerged from the mist like a structure from another century. The main building was constructed from dark stone and brick, with Gothic architecture that included flying buttresses, pointed arch windows, and gargoyle sculptures that seemed to track my movement. Multiple wings extended from the central structure, connected by covered walkways that created a complex, almost maze-like layout. As I parked, I noticed details that hadn't been visible from a distance. Iron symbols were worked into the decorative elements throughout the facade. The windows were fitted with what appeared to be specialized glass that reflected light in unusual patterns. Gardens surrounding the building contained plants I didn't recognize, arranged in geometric patterns that seemed deliberate rather than decorative. Patricia Hawthorne met me at the main entrance before I could knock. She was exactly as I had imagined, sharp-featured, silver-haired, with grey eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. Her handshake was firm, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "Welcome to Crimson Valley, Mr. Sterling. I trust the journey wasn't too difficult." The directions were perfect. This is an impressive facility. Built in 1887 as a monastery, acquired by our organization in 1952. The original structure proved remarkably suitable for our purposes with minimal modification. She led me through heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron bands into a lobby that managed to feel both welcoming and fortified. Religious symbols from multiple traditions decorated the walls alongside artifacts I couldn't identify. The air carried scents of incense, sage, and something faintly metallic. "Before we proceed, I need you to understand exactly what you're agreeing to." Patricia's voice took on a grave formality as she guided me towards her office. "The children here are not metaphorically special or gifted in conventional senses. They possess genuine supernatural abilities inherited from non-human entities their birth parents contracted with. These abilities manifest unpredictably and can be lethal to untrained caregivers." We passed through corridors lined with mirrors positioned at specific angles. I noticed iron crosses embedded not just in door frames but throughout the walls themselves, and lines of white powder, salt, I realized, refreshed along baseboards and around doorways. What kind of contracts are we talking about? Desperate people making impossible bargains. A mother dying of cancer who trades her firstborn's humanity for 5 more years of life. A father facing bankruptcy who exchanges his child's normal development for financial success. Individuals who believe they're negotiating with angels or saints, not realizing they're binding their offspring to entities that view human emotions as amusing weaknesses. Patricia opened a door marked Memorial Archive and gestured for me to enter. The room was larger than I had expected, filled with photographs, personal effects, and detailed case files arranged with museum-like precision. "These represent our institutional memory," she said quietly. 24 former staff members who died, learning how to properly care for these children. Each death taught us something crucial about supernatural management and child protection. The photographs showed men and women of various ages, all with the kind faces of people who had chosen careers helping others. Reading the memorial plaques, I realized some had worked here for over a decade before whatever happened to them. How did they die? Possession events, dimensional displacement, organic matter manipulation, electromagnetic cardiac arrest, precognitive feedback loops, and several incidents we're still trying to understand. The children never intend harm, but their nature makes them conduits for forces that don't distinguish between protection and destruction. Patricia handed me a leather-bound journal with brass corners and a lock that looked far older than the rest of the book. These are our protocols, 10 cardinal rules developed through 24 deaths and 63 years of experience. Memorize them completely. Follow them absolutely. Question them never. Your survival and the safety of everyone here depends on treating these as natural laws rather than suggestions. I opened the journal and read the first rule. Never be alone with any child between 2:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. during any lunar phase. That hour represents peak supernatural influence, Patricia explained. The children's inherited abilities reach maximum potency, and their conscious control is weakest. 7 staff members died during that window before we established this protocol. Rule 2. If a child's reflection shows physical alterations, while their actual body appears normal, evacuate immediately and activate emergency containment. Reflections reveal supernatural manifestations before they become physically dangerous. The mirror network throughout the facility provides early warning systems for possession attempts and dimensional intrusions. I continued reading through increasingly specific and unsettling protocols. Never accept items created by the children's hands. Maintain all children in consecrated quarters during new moon periods. Report instances of synchronized behavior or speech. Never discuss the children's supernatural heritage or birth circumstances. Monitor for electromagnetic anomalies around specific individuals. Implement emergency sedation during solar eclipse events. Document any knowledge the children shouldn't possess. Never work consecutive overnight shifts without partner supervision. These seem incredibly detailed, I observed. Each word is written in blood, Mr. Sterling. Every specification, every exception, every procedural step represents someone who died providing that information. We don't create arbitrary restrictions here. Patricia introduced me to Elena Rodriguez, who would be my primary partner and supervisor. Eleanor was in her late 30s with intelligent brown eyes and the confident bearing of someone who had survived enough supernatural incidents to respect the dangers without being paralyzed by fear. The most important thing you need to understand, Elena told me as she began my facility tour, is that beneath everything supernatural, these are still children. They want friendship, approval, normalcy, and love just like any other kids. Our job is providing those things while ensuring their abilities don't accidentally kill anyone. She pointed out protective measures as we walked. Iron symbols welded into the structural framework. Salt barriers refreshed twice daily by maintenance staff. Specialized mirrors positioned to reveal supernatural manifestations. Emergency communication systems connecting directly to religious authorities and supernatural specialists, and what she called anchor points, blessed objects embedded in walls to stabilize dimensional boundaries. How many children are currently here? 16, ranging from age 4 to 18. You'll primarily work with the middle group, ages 8 to 14. Old enough to understand their situation, but young enough to still need significant guidance and emotional support. That evening, Elena introduced me to my assigned children, and I was struck by how utterly normal they appeared despite everything I had been told. Oliver was 11 years old, with unruly brown hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and an encyclopedic knowledge of comic book characters. He immediately launched into detailed explanations of various superhero storylines while organizing his impressive collection with obsessive precision. Grace was 13, with long black hair, shy green eyes, and a room filled with stuffed animals, arranged with careful attention to size and color coordination. She asked tentatively if I liked to read, mentioning she had finished 12 books that month. Nathan was 17, with the lanky awkwardness of late adolescence, worried about college applications and whether his grades were good enough for the engineering program he wanted to pursue. Lily was 9 years old with curly blonde hair and an infectious laugh, who wanted to show me the elaborate dollhouse she had been building and asked if I knew how to braid hair properly. Emma was 14, with serious dark eyes and artistic hands, who had covered her walls with intricate drawings that demonstrated remarkable talent for someone her age. They were cautious with me, but not unfriendly, displaying the careful wariness of children who had learned that adults often left when they discovered how different these kids truly were. But beneath that protective distance was a desperate hunger for normal human connection that broke my heart. "Do you think you'll stay?" Grace asked quietly during our first extended conversation. Most new people leave after they see what happens around us. "I'm here because I want to help you build the best life possible," I told her honestly. "All of you deserve people who care about you and won't give up when things get difficult." Her smile was radiant and completely typical of a 13-year-old girl pleased by adult approval. Then she reached for a potted plant on her windowsill to water it, and I watched the healthy green leaves turn brown and crumble to dust within seconds of her touch. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pulling her hands back and staring at the dead plant. "I didn't mean to do that. I never mean to do it." "It's okay, Grace. We'll work together to help you understand and control what happens." "But what if I can't? What if I hurt someone important?" I looked at this intelligent, caring girl who had been given a supernatural burden she never chose and was trying desperately to be normal despite it. "Then we'll figure it out together. That's what people do when they care about each other." My first month at Crimson Valley was an intensive education in supernatural childcare, unlike anything I could have imagined. Elena patiently taught me daily routines, specific protocols for different manifestation types, and most importantly, how to recognize the subtle warning signs that preceded supernatural incidents. During my second week, I was helping Oliver with his science homework when I noticed something troubling about his reflection in the classroom windows. While Oliver sat normally at his desk, his reflection showed elongated fingers, ending in sharp claws and eyes that glowed with amber light. Remembering Rule 2, I stood immediately. "Oliver, I need to step out for a moment to get some additional materials. Keep working on those problems about photosynthesis." I left the room and immediately radioed Elena. "We have a Rule 2 situation in classroom 3. Elena arrived within 90 seconds with 2 other staff members I hadn't met before. Together we watched through security monitors as Oliver's supernatural abilities manifested in ways that would have been terrifying if I hadn't understood what was happening. Every plant in the classroom began growing at accelerated rates. Vines erupted from small potted flowers and spread across walls and ceiling. The classroom's small terrarium exploded with new growth that pressed against the glass until it cracked. Oliver sat at his desk, completely unaware of the supernatural greenhouse explosion around him, still working on homework problems about plant biology. The episode lasted 18 minutes before everything returned to normal. When we re-entered the room, Oliver looked up with genuine confusion. "Why are all the plants so big, and why does it smell like a forest in here?" He had no memory of what had occurred. Elena explained that children were typically unconscious during manifestations, their bodies serving as conduits for supernatural forces they couldn't consciously control. "That's why we never blame them for incidents," Elena told me later. "They're passengers in their own bodies when these things happen, not drivers." During my third week, we experienced the facility's monthly, new moon protocol. Elena and I helped to move all 16 children to the consecrated dormitory complex in the facility's basement levels. As we descended, the temperature dropped noticeably, and several children began exhibiting minor supernatural phenomena. Oliver's eyes started glowing amber, and he began having animated conversations with creatures only he could see, gesturing and responding to invisible companions. Grace accidentally killed every plant we passed just by being near them. Nathan became increasingly translucent until he was barely visible, his voice echoing as if coming from a great distance. Lily's dollhouse accessories began moving on their own, tiny furniture rearranging itself into patterns that hurt to look at directly. Emma's drawings started changing on their own, pencil lines shifting and evolving without her touching them. The consecrated dormitory contained these manifestations through what Elena explained was a combination of blessed architecture, protective symbols, and dimensional stabilization technology the facility had developed over decades. New moon periods weakened the barriers between dimensional spaces, Elena explained as we monitored the children through reinforced observation windows. Without lunar light to strengthen protective forces, supernatural influences become more aggressive and harder to contain. The children remained in the consecrated space for 3 full nights, receiving meals and educational activities but never leaving the protected environment until the moon began waxing again. Despite the supernatural complexities, I found myself genuinely caring for these extraordinary children. Oliver loved it when I read comic books with him, doing different character voices and discussing plot developments with the seriousness they deserved. Grace opened up about her dreams of becoming a botanical researcher, hoping she might someday understand her abilities well enough to help plants instead of harming them. Nathan asked for advice about college applications and whether universities would accept someone with his unusual background. Lily wanted help braiding her hair and asked if I thought her dollhouse was pretty. Emma showed me her artwork and asked thoughtful questions about perspective and shading techniques. They were remarkable children dealing with impossible circumstances, and they deserved every bit of support and normalcy I could provide, while maintaining the safety protocols that kept everyone alive. During my 4th week, I witnessed what Elena called a cascade event that demonstrated why the rules existed and why violating them had lethal consequences. Michael Peterson, a new staff member who had started 2 days after me, was working with Emma on an art project when her electromagnetic abilities began manifesting. Electronic devices throughout the art room started malfunctioning. Computers flickered, lights strobed, and the radio began cycling through stations rapidly. According to Rule 7, Emma should have been immediately moved to isolation until the electromagnetic disturbance passed. But Michael, wanting to help Emma finish her drawing, decided the minor malfunctions weren't serious enough to interrupt her work. Within minutes, the electromagnetic interference intensified beyond minor equipment problems. Every electronic device in the building began failing simultaneously. The facility's main power grid overloaded and shut down. Emergency lighting activated, but even those backup systems flickered unstably. But the real danger began when Emma's electromagnetic field reached what Eleanor later called resonance threshold. The iron symbols embedded throughout the facility's walls began vibrating audibly. The protective salt barriers sparked and burned away as if touched by acid. Most terrifyingly, the dimensional stabilization technology that maintained barriers between our world and the supernatural realm began failing catastrophically. Through the art room's observation window, I watched Michael and Emma surrounded by supernatural phenomena that defied description. Shadows moved independently of any light source. The air itself seemed to ripple and bend. Objects appeared and disappeared randomly. Furniture that wasn't from our facility, creatures that looked like they belonged in nightmares, and geometric structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my eyes could process. Michael tried to reach Emma, but the electromagnetic field around her had become lethal to human nervous systems. He collapsed halfway across the room, his body convulsing as supernatural electricity overloaded his brain. Emma sat in the center of the chaos, completely unconscious, her body serving as an unwilling conduit for forces that were tearing holes in reality itself. It took 4 hours, 6 religious authorities, and what Elena described as every spiritual intervention technique we've developed to contain the cascade event and restore normal dimensional boundaries. Michael survived but required 3 weeks of hospitalization and ultimately chose to leave the facility. Rule 7 exists because we learned the hard way that electromagnetic interference isn't just equipment failure, Elena explained afterward. It's a symptom of dimensional boundary degradation. When we ignore the early warning signs, we risk catastrophic breaches that endanger everyone. That incident taught me that the rules weren't arbitrary restrictions created by overly cautious administrators. They were hard-won defenses against supernatural forces that could kill with casual indifference. And as my second month began, I had developed strong relationships with my assigned children while maintaining absolute respect for the protocols that kept us all safe. Oliver trusted me enough to share his secret worry that his animal telepathy abilities made regular pets afraid of him. Grace confided her fear that she would never be able to touch another person without hurting them. Nathan asked for help writing college application essays that didn't mention his supernatural background. Lily brought me flowers she had picked, carefully using gloves so her touch wouldn't kill them. Emma created a portrait of me that captured details about my personality I hadn't realized were visible. These children had become genuinely important to me, and I felt increasingly protective of their well-being and their dreams of normal futures, which made what happened during my 6th week all the more tragic. Elena and I were working the overnight shift when an unexpected solar eclipse began at 2:15 a.m. Astronomical charts hadn't predicted it, but Patricia had warned us that supernatural events sometimes caused celestial phenomena that followed different laws than natural astronomy. Emergency Protocol 9, Elena said immediately, her training taking precedence over any other consideration. All children need emergency sedation and immediate relocation to the underground sanctuary. You begin gathering them from their dormitory while I prepare the sanctuary space and ready the sedative protocols. I hurried through the facility following procedures I had memorized and practiced during emergency drills. Solar eclipses created what the facility's documentation called dimensional windows, periods when supernatural entities could more easily manifest in our reality and attempt to reclaim or possess their offspring. The emergency sedatives were necessary because conscious children during eclipses became perfect conduits for demonic possession. Their awareness and emotional connection to our world made them ideal anchors for entities trying to cross dimensional boundaries. I had successfully gathered 14 of the 16 children when I found Sophie hiding in a supply closet, crying with the desperate terror of a child facing something she couldn't fight or escape. Sophie was 12 years old with curly red hair, intelligent green eyes, and a supernatural heritage that connected her to an entity that controlled dreams and nightmares. She was one of the brightest children in the facility, often helping younger kids with homework and demonstrating emotional maturity beyond her years. "Please don't make me take the medicine," she begged, grabbing onto my shirt with hands that shook from fear. "Please, Mr. Sterling. You don't understand what it does to me." Sophie had tried to explain to me before how the sedatives affected her specifically. Her demonic parents' domain was the unconscious mind, and when she was drugged into sleep during supernatural events, her consciousness was trapped in nightmare realms where the entity had unlimited access to her thoughts and memories. "The medicine is to protect you during the eclipse," I said gently, kneeling to her eye level. "I know it's frightening, but it's only for a few hours until the eclipse passes." "No, you don't understand." Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to explain something beyond normal human experience. "When I'm asleep during eclipses, my parent can reach into my mind completely. It shows me horrible things that might happen to everyone here. It tries to convince me that letting it take control would be better for everyone. It makes me experience the deaths of every person I care about, over and over, until I'm ready to do anything to make it stop, She described psychological torture that had been inflicted on her during every previous eclipse since she had arrived at the facility 2 years ago. The sedatives that protected other children by clouding their consciousness actually made Sophie more vulnerable to supernatural manipulation. "But when I'm awake, I can fight it," she continued desperately. "I can remember who I really am and why I want to stay myself. I can think about the people I care about and use those feelings to resist what it wants me to become." Looking at her tear-streaked face, seeing genuine terror mixed with desperate hope, I faced an impossible choice. Rule 8 was absolutely clear. All children must be sedated during solar eclipse events. But Sophie's explanation made psychological sense, and her conscious resistance had seemed to help her maintain control during previous supernatural incidents I had witnessed. Elena's voice came through my radio. "David, what's your status? We need all children in the sanctuary immediately." I looked at Sophie, who was still clinging to my shirt like I was her only protection against something too terrible to face alone. "Mr. Sterling, please. I promise I'll tell you if I feel anything unusual. I promise I'll let you sedate me if I start losing control. But please don't trap me in there with it when I'm helpless to fight back." Her plea felt like a child asking for protection against the very protocol designed to protect her. In that moment, my compassion overrode my training, and I made a decision that felt merciful but would prove catastrophic. "All right, Sophie, but you have to promise me you'll stay exactly where I can see you and tell me immediately if you feel your parent trying to influence you." Her relief was so overwhelming that she started crying harder, but these were tears of gratitude rather than terror. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Thank you so much. I'll be good. I'll fight against it. I won't let it use me to hurt anyone." I brought Sophie to the underground sanctuary, where Elena was monitoring the other 15 sedated children. The eclipse was intensifying beyond normal astronomical phenomena, with the sky outside turning deep crimson and shadows throughout the facility moving independently of any light source. "Where's Sophie's sedative dose?" Elena asked immediately when she saw the girl was still conscious. "She's going to try staying awake." She explained that sedation makes her more vulnerable to her parents' influence, and her conscious resistance seems more effective than drugged unconsciousness. Elena's face went pale with immediate understanding of what I had done. "David, no. Rule 8 exists specifically because conscious children during eclipses provide exponentially stronger conduits for possession than sedated ones. The sedatives aren't meant to make them more vulnerable. They're meant to cloud their minds enough to prevent full demonic manifestation." "Look at her, Elena. She's maintaining perfect control while the other children are exhibiting supernatural phenomena, even while sedated." Before Eleanor could respond, the facility's main alarm system activated, with a sound I had never heard before, a low, pulsing tone that seemed to resonate in my bones. We both turned to look at Sophie, who was standing in the center of the sanctuary, with an expression of intense concentration on her face, her lips moving silently, as if she was arguing with someone only she could hear. Then I noticed her shadow. Sophie's shadow had separated from her body and was growing larger on the wall behind her. While she stood 5 feet tall, her shadow stretched 20 feet up the wall and was developing features that definitely weren't human. Elongated limbs, clawed hands, and what appeared to be multiple heads with too many teeth. Sophie's eyes rolled back to show only white, and she began speaking in voices that layered over each other in impossible harmonies. "Thank you," she said in her normal 12-year-old voice, clear and grateful. But other voices emerged from her throat simultaneously. Ancient words in languages that predated human civilization, pleading cries in dialects I didn't recognize, and commanding tones that made the sanctuary's walls vibrate. Eleanor grabbed the emergency communication device with one hand, while pulling me away from Sophie with the other. "Sanctuary breach. Repeat. Sanctuary breach. We have active possession in progress with cascade potential." Sophie's separated shadow reached down from the wall, with hands that existed in too many dimensions, lifting me off the ground with supernatural strength. As I struggled against the force, Sophie's physical body began changing in ways that violated basic principles of human anatomy. Her fingers elongated into razor-sharp claws that reflected light like metal. Her teeth grew into fangs that belonged in the mouth of something much larger than a 12-year-old girl. Wings tore through her back with sounds of ripping fabric and breaking bones, spreading wide enough to cast shadows across the entire sanctuary. But most terrifying were her eyes, which had become windows into a realm of endless nightmares. Looking into them, I saw flashes of every horrible thing that had ever happened in the facility, every death that had shaped our rules, every supernatural incident that had traumatized staff and children alike. A voice that wasn't Sophie's spoke through her transformed mouth. The conscious mind is so much stronger than the sleeping one. Your compassion has given me exactly what I needed to anchor myself permanently in this reality. I realized with crushing horror that I had been completely wrong about everything. The sedation protocol wasn't meant to make children more vulnerable to supernatural influence. It was specifically designed to prevent the kind of complete possession I was witnessing. A conscious child during an eclipse didn't just provide a conduit for demonic manifestation. They provided an invitation, an open doorway, a willing anchor point that allowed supernatural entities to establish permanent footholds in our dimensional space. Sophie's nightmare parent was using her conscious mind, her emotional connections, her memories of everyone she cared about, as raw material to build itself a permanent presence in our world. As the entity completed its possession of Sophie's body, the other children in the sanctuary began succumbing to supernatural influence despite their sedation. Their own demonic parents were using Sophie's successful possession as a bridge to cross dimensional boundaries and attempt their own manifestations. Oliver's animal telepathy abilities went haywire, and every creature within miles began converging on the facility. Birds, mammals, insects, things that shouldn't exist in Montana's ecosystem. Grace's organic manipulation powers activated unconsciously, causing rapid growth and death cycles in every plant throughout the building. Nathan began phasing uncontrollably between dimensions, his body flickering in and out of existence while parts of him remain trapped in supernatural spaces. The supernatural force holding me slammed me repeatedly against the sanctuary's reinforced walls. I felt ribs breaking, tasted blood, and realized that my lungs were filling with fluid from internal injuries. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological agony of understanding what I had done. My single act of compassion had triggered a cascade failure that was compromising every protective measure the facility had developed through decades of tragedy. Elena's voice over the communication system was calling desperately for emergency spiritual intervention, but I could hear from her tone that she knew it was too late. The supernatural breach was too extensive, the possession too complete, the cascade effect too advanced. Sophie's face, no longer recognizable as human, turned toward me with predatory satisfaction. When she spoke, it was with the voice of an entity that had spent centuries learning how to manipulate human emotions. Rules exist to protect the innocent from the consequences of their own kindness, it said through her transformed mouth. You chose compassion over wisdom, love over knowledge, mercy over experience. Every human makes the same choice eventually. The sanctuary's lights began failing as electromagnetic interference from multiple supernatural manifestations overloaded the facility's power systems. In the growing darkness, I could see other children undergoing transformations as their demonic parents took advantage of the dimensional breach Sophie's possession had created. Emma's drawings were coming to life, stepping off walls and moving through the sanctuary as if they belonged in our three-dimensional world. Lily's dollhouse had grown to full size, and tiny figures inside it were moving independently, performing activities that seemed to mirror events happening in the facility. Nathan had become completely translucent, his voice echoing from multiple dimensions simultaneously. As darkness closed around me and my breathing became increasingly difficult, I thought about the memorial room and how my photograph would soon join the 24 others. I had become the 25th staff member to die learning why a particular rule existed, and my death would serve as a lesson for whoever came after me. The rules weren't suggestions created by paranoid administrators. They weren't arbitrary restrictions meant to limit compassion or prevent genuine care. They were shields built from human sacrifice, each one representing someone who had died providing crucial information about supernatural childcare. Patricia had tried to warn me. Every specification, every exception, every procedural step was written in blood. But I had trusted my emotional response over institutional knowledge, my desire to help over hard-won wisdom. My final thought, as Sophie's transformed shadow squeezed the life out of me, was about the fundamental tragedy of supernatural childcare. These children needed love, compassion, a normal human connection to develop properly, but providing those things safely required, following protocols that often seemed harsh or uncaring. The most loving thing you could do for a child like Sophie was to follow rules that made her suffer in the short term to prevent something infinitely worse in the long term. Sometimes protection required actions that felt like cruelty to anyone who hadn't witnessed the full consequences of supernatural possession. As my vision faded and my heartbeat slowed, I understood that good intentions without wisdom aren't just useless, they're actively dangerous. The road to hell, as the saying goes, is paved with good intentions, and I had just opened a superhighway. The last thing I heard was the sound of the facility's emergency self-destruct system activating, a final protocol designed to contain supernatural breaches that exceeded all other containment measures. In 30 minutes, everything within a 5-mile radius would be reduced to ash and shadow. The children would die, but so would the entities possessing them. It was the only way to prevent the supernatural breach from spreading beyond the facility and potentially endangering the entire region. I had wanted to save these children from suffering. Instead, my compassion had sealed their fate and my own. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes kindness kills. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do is follow rules that break your heart. I learned that lesson 30 seconds too late to matter,